we want to spend just a couple of minutes talking about this. I come from a very sort of multinational background, and I've had to get along with, since as early as I can remember, I had to speak different languages, and I had to get along with different people, and we moved a lot and everything else. So I always understood how important communication was. I felt like I did. I really didn't understand until I guess I see that more every year. The quality of your entire life is determined by the quality of your communication. All aspects of it. It's a gating factor. I don't care what's going on in here and how great it is. If you can't transmit data reliably and receive data reliably, you're running a monolith in a distributed environment. Okay, and that's difficult to do. So it is worth understanding communication, generally speaking, and not thinking it's narrowed to only one thing or how you write. For some of you, it might be how good your English is or whatever. There is so much more to that than just that, and it's worth a deep dive as a professional, as an aspiring professional into that. So I classify them as, there's kind of three types of communication, and this first one is kind of controversial. Like, people don't think about that, but there's intrapersonal communication. There's how you talk to yourself, right? How do you motivate yourself? How do you keep yourself on task? How do you take notes? How do you create a continuum of you now and in the future that communicates with each other, with each instance? How do you inform yourself? That's really important. There's interpersonal communication, which is how most people see communication. It's how you can communicate to someone else. And then there's the third one, which is group communication, how you communicate to groups. One secret is group communication doesn't really exist. Groups are just groups of individuals. So when I'm communicating to you, at any point in time, I feel like I'm communicating to whoever's on my screen right now. I see VT, Sandeep, Nilesh, Sam, Ravi, Silvana, Nate. Like, I'm looking at each one of you, and that's an important thing to note when you're communicating to groups. You are just communicating to individuals in that group. No group wants to listen to a speech, All right, so let's go back one. One important thing is, these inform each other. If you communicate unkindly to yourself, you're likely to communicate unkindly to others when you're under stress, because that's your natural state. If you make an effort to communicate to people, let's say in a very patient way, you will eventually learn to be patient with yourself. So those things inform each other. There needs to be a balance, or else it's too much work to change configuration modes for all these communication use cases, I guess. So if we go to the next slide, this is, I don't know if you've heard about this, but I know people understand that body language is a big part of how the message is received, but look at how big. This is research data. This is message accuracy. This is not just someone guessing it. Only 7% of what you say matters in the grand scheme of the message that others receive from you. So what format do we have where we only use words? Slack, email. Don't try to communicate there. Like, Slack and email, are good for data sharing, fact finding, that sort of thing. Once you have to communicate something that requires empathy, you need more than that, because your tone of voice is conveyed when you have when you have audio. And then what's more, the reason why we love video is your body language comes through. So people can tell so much by what you're trying to say when they can see you. So always go for that as much as you can, because it creates a complete message. Now, in terms of styles, there are passive communicators, people that want to say something, but they don't say it. They're shy. They can't say it. They think it's wrong, whatever. we all have certain situations where we might be passive communicators. I would say just, try to minimize that as much as you can. Aggressive communication, we all know, not great. Sometimes it works. If there is a crisis, there's a production emergency, someone needs to take charge, someone needs to drive in the situation, that's fine. But most of the time, it's not appropriate. And there's passive aggressive communication, which is sort of better than the other two, but still not great, which is kind of grumbling, like, no, it's okay, whatever. Instead of showing your aggression, to kind of let it leak out a little bit. It is better than being aggressive because people kind of get a hint. But all those are sort of suboptimal communication styles. The one that we want to go for is assertive. That's the unicorn, is be direct, be respectful. Whatever you say should value mutual respect first, and then give the truth. So you should be really concerned with communicating something that protects respect first and then tells the truth. Say what needs to be said. Say it as directly and respectfully as possible. Understand that you're not speaking for everyone. You are only giving us the output of your model. You're only giving us the conclusions that you came to, and that's okay. Speak about yourself. Sometimes the group will feel like you're right. Sometimes the group will feel like you're wrong. Sometimes they like where you're going, but it doesn't fit the current constraints. Either way, it helps to add in that. So the other thing is, like, understand when you're having a conversation, like, don't focus on the outcome. Don't go in a conversation saying, I want to have this conversation so that I can steer this thing this way. Don't attempt to control it or play like a chess game. If they say this, I'll say that. It makes things seem very salesy, and it actually inhibits authentic communication where meaning is created. And we'll talk about that in a second. So the biggest thing, like, I coach all the time. I love coaching my kids in sports. I've done it in multiple sports. I've been trained and certified. One of the things they tell you is, if a kid makes a mistake, tell them they made a mistake as quickly as possible, but don't sound mad or happy, or don't attach any emotion to it. Just say it. Just state it out. Take out the emotional noise. The reason is, if there's any emotional noise in your message, people will process the emotional noise first. And that keeps them from actually focusing on your message. So keep that in mind. Just say it. Hey, I just think this isn't whatever. Like, you don't need to embellish it with your feelings, and you don't need to anticipate what the other person's feelings might be. It's a more lean way to communicate, and as long as it preserves mutual respect, right? Okay, so this is kind of how I look at it. When you talk about communication getting across, right, there's multiple layers, and you can only get to the next layer if your first layer is efficient. At the bottom of the communication pyramid is just raw communication. So I see that as the data layer. So someone is transmitting information that is predetermined, like a fact. They're making a statement. They know what they're going to say, right? It needs to be high fidelity, compressed, and omni-channel. High fidelity meaning the focus in this layer of communication is that people understand what you're saying, that there's no data transmission errors. And that doesn't just mean speak clearly. That also means choose the words carefully. Don't add detail that isn't there. Try to get it to a point where it can transmit reliably over this communication mechanism that you have. Compressed in a sense that, you're exchanging data points here. So just get the data point out there and not your analysis of it on top of it. And omni-channel, in that you should optimize for doing it, whether it's verbally, written, video, like, there's different ways of communicating, right? So you can adapt to each channel appropriately. Something you would say in person wouldn't necessarily be a pleasant Slack read, having someone send you 2 paragraphs in Slack. So optimize for the channel. On the receiving side, in this layer of communication, you should be acknowledging things that you understand them. You should do error correction. So when someone says something that you actually think is not factual, you should say, hey, but no, I actually saw this, so let's get that right. Okay, so you're there to sort of almost like fact check if you have the data or if you have a different data set. And update the models in that, like, take the data in and use it to update the opinion that you might have had about the issue. So stay open to that. And symmetry is unnecessary, meaning we may go into someone like Sam might have done an RCA and he wants to communicate it to us on what's going on. He'll do 80% of the talking as long as he has 80% of the data. He doesn't need to pause and pass it around because this is just raw communication at the data layer. Now, what happens is if you communicate very well at the data layer, then you get to have conversations. And conversations is at the protocol layer where they're adaptive. What you're doing is it has a rhythm to the conversation where you want to get people's feedback on certain things. You want to get people to think in a different way. So you have to take it a little bit slower, be more adaptive, be flexible in your thinking. If you are on the receiving side, if someone is trying to converse with you on something, your responsibility is to sort of guide them to what they want to say. If you see them getting, stuck here or there, your point is like to what we said last time is allow them to shoot their shot, like allow them to shoot to make their best argument that they want to make about something. That's your job. You may disagree with it when it's done, but that's how you have good and efficient conversations. Symmetry is required because conversations are not monologues. So now you have people that can transmit stuff reliably to each other. Then you have people that flow together in the rhythm of a conversation. What that gives you in the end is meaning. What's the point of this conversation? What did we just learn? What are we going to do differently? How are we going to see the world differently based on what we just discussed? What steps are we going to take? How do we change our model of the world in some small or big way based on this conversation that was just had? Because that's also really important. Ephemeral communication that happens and then disappears is not useful. But if we come to some sort of insight together because we had a great conversation, we need to find a way to secure that insight and use it to drive us forward. The other thing that happens is when you get to that level with somebody, when you have a meaningful, raw communication that leads to a pleasant conversation that creates meaning, you have made an investment in future communication with this person. Now there's a bond. And that's why it's worth, doing all of that. So that's how I look at it. Not all the time, but when you really break it down, you can understand that, like, how all these things build on each other to get us to the point where we can find meaning in our interactions and in our communication.